Adolf Hitler feared a lot of things. Losing power, being betrayed, and fading into irrelevance were among the top of that list. But one fear stood out, looming larger than the others. It's almost laughable if it weren't so grotesque. He was terrified of the dentist. Behind the polished uniforms and fiery speeches, his teeth were rotting away. He knew it, his aides knew it, and his doctors begged him to face it. But the real question was, what was hiding in his mouth? Why would a man who could command nations be paralyzed by a dental chair? And how did his secret decay become one of the most disturbing reflections of his decline? Hitler's oral health wasn't just bad, it was famously bad. According to his personal dentist, Dr. Hugo Blaschke, Hitler suffered from chronic halitosis, bleeding gums, and decaying teeth for most of his adult life. Yet, despite being arguably the most powerful man in Europe, he actively avoided dental treatment. He hated sitting in the chair. He wouldn't allow anesthesia, not even for root canals, and often canceled appointments at the last minute, sometimes avoiding treatment for years. One of his closest aides described his breath as the stench of death itself. To understand why Hitler feared the dentist, you have to look past just the pain. Going to the dentist means giving up control. You lie back, open your mouth, and let someone get close with sharp tools and strange chemicals. For a man whose entire worldview was built on control and domination, that kind of vulnerability wasn't just uncomfortable, it was unbearable. There are multiple reports that Hitler didn't even like being touched casually. His handshake was famously limp, and he often avoided eye contact in private conversations. Yet on stage, his personality was completely the opposite. In public, he thrived on control, commanding crowds with fiery speeches and carefully staged displays of power. But in the dentist's chair, with his mouth open and no way to assert himself, that control disappeared. And that was something he couldn't handle. Dr. Blaschke confirmed that by the late 1930s, Hitler's dental hygiene was a disaster. He had at least 10 severely decayed teeth, a bridge made of metal, and chronically inflamed gums. Historians now believe Hitler may have had periodontal disease, an advanced form of gum infection that, if left untreated, can cause internal damage, even to the heart and brain. But the most disturbing part was that Hitler knew something was wrong and still refused proper care. Instead, he relied on bizarre alternative remedies recommended by his equally eccentric physician, Dr. Theodor Morell. Morell, considered a quack by modern standards, prescribed Hitler a cocktail of animal enzymes, bile-based rinses, and methamphetamine-laced tonics to ease his discomfort. Nothing worked, and still, Hitler refused invasive treatment. Hitler's dependence on medication became infamous. By the time the war reached its final stages, he was taking more than 80 pills a day. This included painkillers, barbiturates, hormonal tonics, and methamphetamines. Among his medications were several digestive aids, which, ironically, may have made his dental problems worse by drying out his mouth and irritating his gums. There's numerous post-war accounts suggesting that Hitler's teeth were so far gone by 1945 that bits of food would remain lodged in his molars for weeks, causing visible swelling in his face and unbearable odor. He didn't chew in public, he stopped smiling, and his staff began to avoid standing too close. The very mouth that once held crowds captive with speeches was rotting silently. By April 1945, Berlin was collapsing. Soviet troops were closing in, and Hitler had retreated to the Führer bunker, where his world was shrinking by the hour. In those final days, he made one request to his staff: ensure that Dr. Blaschke's dental assistant, Käthe Häusermann, remained nearby, not to fix his teeth, but so that someone could identify his body. Hitler had become so paranoid, so obsessed with the idea of being defiled in death, that he planned for only his dentist to confirm it was really him. And that's exactly what happened. On May 8, 1945, Soviet forces discovered a charred body outside the bunker. It was barely recognizable, but Hitler's jaw and upper dental bridge had survived the fire. Using dental records and X-rays provided by Blaschke and Häusermann, the Soviets confirmed the corpse was indeed Hitler. He may have feared the dentist in life, but in death, his teeth told the world who he really was. But let's rewind for a moment, because Hitler's fear of the dentist wasn't only about pain. In some sick and twisted way, it was tied to his identity. He was obsessed with projecting power and control, and anything that revealed vulnerability, physical, emotional, or otherwise, was ruthlessly hidden. That's why he refused to wear glasses in public, even though he was almost legally blind. It's also the reason why he kept his left hand, which often trembled uncontrollably, tucked behind his back during speeches. In a regime built on carefully managed appearances, even Hitler's mouth had to be disguised. And yet, behind closed doors, the truth was impossible to ignore. His close aides noted that Hitler had a habit of picking at his gums, wincing as he chewed, and occasionally excusing himself from meetings due to mouth pain. He would rinse obsessively, sometimes 4 or 5 times a day, with concoctions Dr. Morell claimed would strengthen the gums. One such tonic reportedly included a mix of herbal oil, animal bile, and formaldehyde. As you might guess, it didn't work. These desperate attempts at control only amplified the chaos inside his own body. His gums continued to recede, his teeth continued to decay, and by 1945, Hitler's breath was so foul, one SS officer privately remarked that he spoke like a corpse and smelled like one too. The rot in his mouth reflected more than bad hygiene. It mirrored the collapse happening outside the bunker walls. As Germany fractured under the weight of war, Hitler's own body was breaking down from within. It's hard not to see the irony here. The man who once gripped entire nations with fiery speeches could now barely open his mouth without flinching. He'd silenced millions, yet couldn't escape the screams coming from inside his own gums. And still, he refused to let anyone see it. That's what makes this story unsettling. It wasn't simply dental neglect, but a denial so deep that his refusal to face vulnerability became self-destructive. But here's where it gets even stranger. In the final weeks of the war, as Hitler secluded himself in the bunker beneath Berlin, his dental hygiene deteriorated even faster. He no longer had access to regular supplies, and Morell, his personal drug dealer in a lab coat, was dismissed just days before Hitler's death. That left Hitler alone with a dwindling stash of pills, worsening infections, and untreated abscesses. His face began to swell, and his breath grew even worse. Some historians believe his decaying gums may have been contributing to systemic inflammation, brain fog, and even behavioral changes. Infections in the mouth can release toxins into the bloodstream, and for someone already addicted to stimulants, running on little sleep, and sinking into paranoia, it likely clouded his judgment in those final days. When Soviet troops finally entered the bunker complex, what they found was surreal: burnt corpses, scattered pills, and in the ashes, fragments of a jawbone with terrible dental damage. That fragment, preserved and studied for decades, became the key to confirming Adolf Hitler's death. The man who built his power on carefully staged appearances, concealing his frailty behind uniforms and speeches, was identified not by his military medals or his fingerprint or even his DNA, but by his rotting teeth. And the irony doesn't stop there. That same dental bridge, the one that caused him years of pain and paranoia, now sits in Russian archives, a piece of evidence, a piece of history, and a piece of a man who couldn't bear to open his mouth for help. So why does this matter? Because it shows the lengths people will go to preserve control, to protect their image, and to avoid pain. Even those who seem untouchable and larger than life can be undone by the simplest human flaws like fear, vanity, and denial. Hitler feared the dentist, but in the end, the very thing he avoided became the thing that told the world he was dead. His mouth betrayed him, and that might be the most fitting ending of all.